A vast sprawling world, complex and challenging combat, memorable and punishing boss fights. It's fair to say that Elden Ring has all the hallmarks of a From Software masterpiece. Whether you're a Souls veteran who's beaten Bloodborne blindfolded, or you've only heard about Elden Ring because the Game of Thrones guy is involved, you can't have missed how wildly successful this game has been, outselling industry titans like Call of Duty and receiving impressive review scores across the board. It's undoubtedly one of the best RPGs of all time, and already a contender for the greatest game of this console generation. But it's a bit strange for people to call Elden Ring a Western RPG, considering its developer is based in Japan. Surely by that logic, it should be called a JRPG, right? Well, actually no. Elden Ring is by all measures a Western RPG in design and execution. And the reasons why are key to answering the question, how did a Japanese studio develop the best Western RPG of this generation? There are several tropes that define Western and JRPGs. An obvious one being setting. Western role-playing games are often based on traditional fantasy. Elves, wizards, orcs, and mages battling across European-looking environments and stone-walled fortresses. Think The Lord of the Rings or King Arthur. Comparatively, traditional JRPGs tend to focus on the fantastical worlds you're likely to see in anime, turning major cities and towns into demonic hellscapes more reminiscent of a theme park, like you might see in manga such as Berserk or Tokyo Ghoul. Western RPGs also take many of their gameplay ideas from tabletop RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons, with character traits based around each individual player's investment into stats like strength, dexterity, and magic. On the other hand, JRPGs focus more on understanding pre-written characters and what skills and weaknesses they have against the various threats they face. Western RPGs ultimately tend to focus on choice. The player builds their character and tells their own story in the universe. JRPGs provide you with a set of characters and let the story play out as the writers intended. Compare the character creation and wide range of stats in Divinity Original Sin 2 to any Final Fantasy game and you'll get the idea. When it comes to Elden Ring, this all applies, in part due to the influence of American author George R.R. Martin. Many of the relationships and characters established in the world are reminiscent of his traditional Western fantasy style, best seen in Game of Thrones. The familial relations, and curse left upon them as a result, are both present in Cersei and Jaime's incestuous relationship and the weird Marika Radigan symbiosis. And the importance of trees in both Game of Thrones' Weirwood and Elden Ring's Erd trees are just a couple of examples. But this isn't the only factor that makes Elden Ring not only a Western RPG, but one that has set new standards that most games actually developed in the West have failed to live up to. From the moment you first open the door to Limgrave and see the sheer scale of Elden Ring's world, the game offers an almost infinite number of possibilities of where to go and what to do. That's of course not unusual in games of this type. Fallout 3, The Witcher 3, and Dragon Age Inquisition all also offer this enticing freedom of exploration. But where these games differ from Elden Ring is in how they present this content. Elden Ring is happy to hide most of its secrets away for you to discover by yourself. In fact, it feels like that's the whole design philosophy. You can go in this direction and get instantly bludgeoned by a knight on a golden horse, or that direction and get ambushed by a dragon in a lake. Or you can go down to this beach and battle strange octopus balls. Or you can talk to this weird guy in a white mask. Or you can go here, or here, or here, or here. Each location has something new and interesting to explore, and none of this is marked out to you anywhere. From Software have faith in their world design and trust that you'll find this content on your own. The game approaches its narrative in a similar way. While there are some cutscenes to flesh out individual characters and their relationships, much of the story's content has to be interpreted through item descriptions and analysis of the environment. The player can learn as much of the story as they want. If narrative isn't your thing, you're free to enjoy the game's mechanics without sitting through endless dialogue. Compare this design philosophy to that of a prolific Western developer of RPGs, Ubisoft. The tropes of their games have become so commonplace as to be made a mockery. A map full of markers denoting quests and collectibles, a main character narrating every action they're taking, an overwhelming amount of information on the screen at all times dictating your every move. It's almost as if their games are desperate for you to find everything they have to offer, as if the player simply won't be having any fun unless they know exactly what to do and where to go at all times. At no point do Ubisoft games trust the player to find things on their own, to tell their own story at their own pace, to learn the rules and mechanics of the world by themselves and find the style that suits them. Some Western game devs actually tried to call out Elden Ring and insist that its design philosophy is the wrong way to make games. This included Ubisoft UX designer Ahmed Salama, who criticised Elden Ring's user interface on Twitter, calling the user experience generally awful. However, many were quick to chastise him, precisely because he's a UX developer at Ubisoft, with one Reddit user even mocking up this parody screenshot of Elden Ring as if it had been designed by his company. This imagined version may be tongue-in-cheek, but the fact that there's at least a proportion of people so fed up of the accessibility and convenience that Western games force upon them that they could mock them in this way speaks volumes for why Elden Ring has usurped them. It shows the way Western developers are taught how to make games in the first place. The fact Salama felt comfortable enough to voice these opinions on Twitter and face the wrath of furious commenters demonstrates that he feels games have to be designed in a certain way, and other philosophies aren't different but entirely wrong. It's not fair to say that all the criticisms of Elden Ring were wrong, however. Guerrilla Games developer Blake Rebouchet was critical of the game's quest design, as NPCs often disappear from a location without warning and end up somewhere completely random, meaning questlines can be easily missed or broken without the use of a guide. Sometimes even your guide character Melina, who appears at set points to offer narrative dialogue and advice on what to do next, will suddenly discuss something from much later on in the story without previous context because you'll have missed a checkpoint earlier on. This can be incredibly frustrating for those following the narrative closely and trying to understand the world and its characters. However, not only has From Software patched the game to address some of these issues by adding NPC markers and location hints respectively, but for the majority, that didn't seem to really matter. They were willing to forgive some technical issues and narrative obscurity because the trade-off for rewarding exploration and genuine discovery was worth it. What Western RPG fans want and what Western RPG game developers think fans want hasn't always aligned. So how has a Japanese company been able to satisfy this player base? Looking at the reception to Elden Ring, there are certain things that developers in the West can do to try and emulate its success. The game's entire design philosophy demands the player to go and seek out its content for themselves, rewarding them at every turn with new dungeons to explore, encounters to engage in, and secrets to uncover. Almost none of this is directly told to the player. The only hints you get are markings on the artistically drawn map and whatever you can see in the distance. There are no quest markers, no arrows holding you by the hand telling you where to go, no sense that the game designer is terrified that you might miss something. And that also goes for the gameplay. Barring an entirely skippable tutorial section, Elden Ring demands that you figure out how all its mechanics and tools work by experimenting by yourself, trying things out on the various enemies and ultimately making mistakes and trying again. It wants you to learn by failing, relying on your own intuition to figure out what you're doing wrong and what you need to do to fix it. You can always go online and watch tutorial videos or read guides to help you, but that's your choice to do. The game doesn't insist on telling you everything to the detriment of the overall experience. And From Software give you so many ways to approach Elden Ring's challenges. Over the last 2 decades, FromSoft have perfected their gameplay style, developing expertise in the level design and combat mechanics required to make a huge variety of build options not only playable, but fun at the same time. Whether it be using strong and slow giant swords, fast and light blades, magic spells, fire or lightning incantations, NPCs, cooperative online players, and the new Ash of War enemy summons, there's a character build to fit your taste and style. The game is the culmination of a decade's worth of refinement and expansion of their previous titles, applying it to an open world setting and co-authoring a story better than anything they've done before. Elden Ring somehow manages to break the mold, and in doing so, returns Western RPGs to their tradition. By focusing on player choice in all aspects of its design, it does the very things that games developed in the West have failed to do this generation. By working with the biggest Western fantasy writer on the planet to help build the world, and then allow players to freely explore its secrets for themselves, From Software opened up their perfected style of gameplay and level design to a whole new audience. It's a style of game that just couldn't have been made in the West. Developers are actually discouraged from making games this way. It had to take a Japanese developer to break free from these shackles and reinvent the way Western RPGs are thought about, and only one with the talent and experience of From Software to make one this good.